Hi, Stephanie. Thanks so much for doing this interview.
Hi, Allison. How are you today?
Very good, thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit about your career path. If you could start us off by sharing with everyone your name and your current position.
Okay, great. Well, my name is Stephanie Bell, and I'm an assistant professor and assistant director at Pepperdine, Straus Institute for Dispute Resolution.
And tell us a little bit about what your career path looked like before reaching Straus.
Well, I went to law school thinking I want to be a mediator, and this was over 20 years ago. I wasn't even exactly sure what that was, but I had a sense that it was my calling. Um, I did something that many of us do, which is I got into a clinic, which led into a job. And so I was practicing criminal defense. I was a federal assistant. Actually, I was at the Federal Public Defender's Office, a research attorney, where I basically did misdemeanor cases on the naval base and helped write appeals. I did that for a while, a year or so, a year and a half, and then realized that I was miserable. Not miserable because it wasn't a great calling. I think it's a very high calling. But my particular gift in the way that I can contribute to a product wasn't being used. So I took a half pay cut at that point and went to work at a nonprofit where I managed 13 different divisions of the district court up in the Seattle area, running their small claims court programs, civil harassment type mediation programs. I did that for a couple of years, then moved on to the city of Seattle, where I helped design a labor management mediation program. Um, in a joint labor management context that was to be used for labor and employment disputes at the city of Seattle. I was there a few years and then moved on to the county, and that program was a even more kind of comprehensive program. It was a shared neutrals program, which is based on many programs in the federal sector, but I don't think there's very many of them at the local level. And that was labor, employment, and beyond, public policy, annexations, permitting cases, any service that government needed essentially in mediation was served through that program, including, there's a range from mediation cases all the way through more generalized conflict resolution consulting, training, working with groups that were very distressed, dysfunctional, and in conflict, and going in and doing large-scale, comprehensive consulting products for that agency. And I was there the last 8 or 9 years before I moved to Pepperdine 2 years ago. All along the way, I had the teaching bug. So I taught at Seattle U School of Law. I've been teaching negotiations at a master's in public administration program for the past 10 years or so. And then I think about 5 years ago, I started teaching at Pepperdine as an adjunct. 2 years ago, I took a position here, and currently what I do is I teach. So I teach psychology of conflict. I direct the mediation clinic. I teach mediation. I also advise all of our JD MDR students. So those are students who are getting their JD and their MDR both in a 3-year period. So it's a very ambitious program, but we have very committed students who will often start in what we call a 0L summer before law school or during the summers. They complete, a total of 32 credits to get their master's in dispute resolution, as well as their JD. So that's what I'm currently doing.
Wow, so cool. So as you have been on this path, what advice did you get about pursuing a career in dispute resolution so early or so soon after graduating from law school?
Well, the advice I got was very hopeless. There wasn't very much hopeful advice. It was good advice, though. I don't want to disparage much of the advice I got. I think the advice I got was people looking through their own lens, where they're thinking, what does a mediator do? Well, they do commercial mediation, and you can't do that, is what I heard. And they were right. I couldn't do that. However, there is a wide range of dispute resolution roles. Clearly, I've now had 4 jobs, each paying like, they've doubled in salary for a while at least, um, in dispute resolution. So clearly that was incorrect. I did have one very hopeful person, Julia Gold at the University of Washington, who, as I kind of was crawling to her, demoralized in my first couple of years of practicing law, she was in her first year at UW as the clinician, and she was someone who took me under her wing and has been a real mentor to me, and very hopeful. But most of the advice I got was, you can't do it, and simply said, that's not true. You can do it, but it's not going to look like jams, from the get-go. It just doesn't quite look like that.
So, based on your own experience in successfully pursuing a career in dispute resolution and in your role as advisor in the JD MDR program at Pepperdine, what advice would you give to others who would like to who would like to pursue dispute resolution as their career?
Right. Well, it's interesting because I give a lot of advice about this, and it depends very much on the student. So, there's probably 2 or 3 different categories of students that come to me asking this question. Many of the JDs, if they are liking what they're doing, they like practicing law, they're willing to go out and get experience as advocates, I recommend that they pursue that path for a little while. Even though I didn't practice for a long time, I will tell you, there's something to be said for I practiced for a couple years before I did this, that being able to return to that experience, what it was to be an advocate, and that I guess it's kind of a competence that you prove with other lawyers if you're practicing in the litigated case. So there's a fair number of my students who want to do that, and I really encourage them to go out and pursue that for a while with their eye on the prize. How do I practice law for a while, knowing that eventually I might want to step into the role of a neutral? And how do I lead my practice with that, kind of end goal in sight? Some of my students come to me and they say, I don't want to practice law. They know from the get-go, and there's not very many of those every year. But for the couple who are absolutely clear that they want to go straight into dispute resolution, I'm wildly supportive, because I put myself in that category as well. And clearly, if you're good at what you do, and you're entrepreneurial, to say that it can't be done is hogwash. I mean, here I say it, here you say it. I mean, it can be done. It can be done. But you have to have the fire in your belly. And you have to be willing to perhaps pay with your pocketbook. I always say, you earn or you learn. And that year I left being a federal public defender to go work at a private nonprofit. Truly there was some consumer debt. I took a half pay cut. And I had to think about it and conceptualize it as a postdoc of sorts. Otherwise it would have never flown. And it couldn't have sustained me for very long with debt. So what I tell those students is, go for it. And we help try and find them a good fit with their interest level. So for some students, that's going into the world of ombuds. For others, it's community mediation. I have a student last year who went straight into a consulting firm from being a JD. He's now doing conflict resolution consulting, and he actually convinced the firm to open an arm of conflict resolution after doing an externship with them. So, everybody has their own unique thumbprint that they put upon this, and that's the main piece of advice I give the people who have the fire in their belly. This is the blog for ADR as a first career. So I assume I'm going to be speaking to many of you right now, that you have to kind of leverage your own strengths and be willing to be a little bit scrappy in order to make it happen.
I love it. Scrappy, fire in the belly. I mean, those are things that I think ring true in a lot of these interviews that folks have used to identify themselves and their career path. Thanks so much.
Well, and one thing I will say is that that's just the current state of affairs. I mean, all of the MDRs, all of the students, LLMs that we're training that will be the lawyers of tomorrow, it may not be that the commercial mediation market is exclusively a gray-haired market. I mean, there's something to be said definitely about experience, about the product there that people want is an evaluative directive product, and you have to have a certain type of experience and probably age in order to leverage the closure. I mean, I understand all of that, but my students now, they do not defer to authority in the same way. I mean, they have these .com presidents that are, their peers perhaps. And I do believe there will be more job descriptions where people don't have to be so entrepreneurial, but there'll be places and positions to step into in the next generation. And so the students that are getting educated now are kind of positioning themselves to perhaps either create those positions or be able to step into them with experience. So, definitely we're a product of a new field. We're arguably 60 years old as a profession or something like that. So, someday, I mean, I guess that's my call to the future. Someday it may look a little different, where there's a path from perhaps law school to first year or first career ADR that's a little more welcoming and requires a little less pioneering, perhaps.
That is beautiful. That is some great insight and a wonderful, hopeful message for the future that really reflects the current generation that we're looking at and that we are educating right now.
Yeah. We're educating. I mean, the students of today are different than I was. Right? They're different. They have computer. I didn't even have a computer in my law school class.
Right. Things are changing. Let's let them change. Let's let it grow. I love it.
Yes.
All right. Well, Stephanie, I want to say thanks so much for taking the time to do this interview and, again, for sharing those insights and that hope of what the future might look like.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Fingers crossed. And, Allison, I want to add one more thing, which is I have had some very generous mentors who have reached out to me. And based on their generosity, I've always had a policy throughout my career is if someone wants an informational interview, they get it. So if there's anything I can do to help anyone who's reading this blog think about their career path and honestly think about the financial viability, because I care very much about that aspect of it, especially as a professor where we take people's it's an honor to take people's tuition, and it's a covenant we have with them, and we talk very frankly about that. I care about people's debt load too. So if there's anyone who just wants to kind of talk about these issues or their own personal future, I'd be happy to chat with them for a little while.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Stephanie. And I think we're going to put a link or somehow add your CV to the post, so folks should be able to see that in the comment section or in the post itself and find your email address there.
Great. Thank you, Allison. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Stephanie.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.